So, what are your plans after this? Tessia asked, breaking the awkward silence the director had left behind. After classes, there's an emergency meeting for the disciplinary committee, Art replied, leaning back in his chair. Curtis, Claire, and I are going to be away from campus over the weekend, so we'll need to plan for any emergencies that might come up while we're gone. After that, I'll probably head home and get some rest. It's been a while since I've slept there. I'll be back by tomorrow morning, in time for the excursion. What about you? I'm free until the student council meeting, Tessia said, her tone lighter now. Professor Glory canceled class so we could rest up. We still have to go over a few things on the agenda, since both Clive and I will be away too. She seemed a lot calmer than before, sitting cross-legged on the grass, absent-mindedly playing with Sylvie's paws. She looked almost carefree. Art couldn't help but think she looked cute like that, relaxed, the sunlight catching in her silver hair. They chatted a little longer, the conversation easy and unhurried, until Art finally stood to head to his remaining classes. The next few hours dragged on painfully slow, each lesson filled with review for the upcoming mid-semester exams. That will be it for today, class. Remember to keep up with your studies instead of procrastinating and cramming everything the night before. I know you all love doing that, Professor Maynor said sarcastically as he handed out review sheets on basic spell formations. Art stepped out, his boots meeting the smooth stone path leading up to the grand staircase. Each step stirred memories, his return from Elenoir, the aftermath of the dire tombs. But this time, for once, he was coming home without having put his family through worry or fear. Before he could even raise a hand to knock, the enormous front doors burst open and an Ellie-shaped blur launched straight at him. "Brother! Welcome home!" Ellie collided with him, wrapping her small arms tightly around his waist. Art stumbled back, barely managing to keep them both upright. "Q!" Sylvie chirped, hopping off his head and onto Ellie's. The little dragon began licking her face enthusiastically as Ellie giggled, clutching both of them in a joyful embrace. "That tickles, Sylvie," Ellie laughed, untangling herself from Art as she scooped up the little dragon and tickled her back. Sylvie let out a delighted chirp, her tiny wings fluttering. "I was wondering what all the noise was. You're back a little late, son." Reynolds leaned against the doorframe, a broad grin spreading across his face. "The meeting ran longer than I expected." "It's been a while, Dad," Art said, stepping forward to hug him. Ellie followed close behind, still cradling Sylvie in her arms. "Ah, you're back, Arthur. You must be exhausted," Alice called as she hurried down the stairs. She didn't hesitate before wrapping her arms tightly around him. "Hey, Mom." "Yeah, I'm back," Art said softly, smiling as warmth filled his chest. Moments like this, simple, ordinary, full of love, were the ones he treasured most. "How are you?" "Are you all better now?" Alice asked, immediately fussing over him. She tugged up his shirt and turned him slightly, checking for any lingering wounds. "I'm fine now," Art chuckled, trying not to squirm. "You're worrying too much." He offered her a reassuring smile, though a shadow of thought flickered in his mind, his father's words about his mother's magic. Still, he pushed the thought aside. There was a reason for everything, and when she was ready, she'd tell him. For now, being home was enough. "Brother, how long are you staying?" Ellie asked, practically bouncing beside Art as the family made their way toward the living room. "I'm leaving early tomorrow morning," he replied with a sigh. "What? Why?" Ellie's face fell, her shoulders slumping as the brightness in her eyes dimmed. "Yeah, why so soon?" Reynolds added, settling onto the sofa and eyeing his son curiously. "One of my classes has an excursion to the Beast Glades tomorrow," Art explained, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just one night, but we leave at dawn." The thought of waking up before sunrise already made him feel tired. The Beast Glades? Alice's expression immediately paled. Even Reynolds' easygoing demeanor faded into concern. Art couldn't blame them. His last trip there had nearly cost him his life. Don't worry, he said quickly, pulling a small ring from his pocket. We'll only be on the outskirts, and our professor's coming with us. Besides, I've got the ring. It was the communication ring the Hellstay family had gifted them. The linked pair allowed his parents to sense his well-being through mana circulation. If something happened to him, they'd know. He usually kept it off during school to avoid unnecessary panic, but he planned to wear it for the trip. But still, is it mandatory for you to go? Alice asked, her brows knitting together, worry etched in every line of her face. We'll be fine, Art assured her gently. It's one of the lowest-ranked dungeons, and we're not allowed past the 3rd floor. Though his words were meant to soothe her, Alice's frown didn't fully fade. She only nodded after a moment, her lips pressing together in reluctant acceptance. The 4 of them spent a few quiet hours catching up while Sylvie dozed peacefully on Ellie's lap. Ellie chattered happily about her ladies' school, beaming with pride over her progress, while their parents, still as healthy and affectionate as ever, listened with warm smiles. It hadn't been long since Art had last seen them, but even a few weeks away made moments like this feel precious. When he asked about the Hellstay family, his father explained that Vincent and Tabitha were away on a business trip to another city. As the night grew late, his parents gently ushered both siblings toward their rooms. Art nearly fell asleep in the shower, and after drying off, he collapsed onto his bed with a long sigh of relief. It felt good, comforting, to be home again. Just as sleep began to tug at his consciousness, a soft knock sounded at the door. Too tired to move, he turned his head toward the sound and saw a small face peeking in. "Can I sleep with you tonight, brother?" Ellie whispered, clutching her stuffed animal tightly. "Sure," Art murmured with a faint smile, lifting the blanket beside him. "Yay!" she squeaked, scrambling into the bed and wriggling until she was comfortable. The bed was more than spacious enough for both of them, but she still pressed close, facing him. "Good night," he said softly, patting her head. "Good night, brother." They drifted to sleep together, the rhythm of each other's breathing filling the quiet room. Turning back, Art waved with a grin before stepping into the carriage. Sylvie had already made herself comfortable inside, and as soon as he sat down, she curled up beside him. Following her lead, he leaned back and let his eyes close, slipping into sleep as the carriage began its journey toward Xyrus. "Arthur." Stepping out of the carriage, Art spotted Curtis waving at him, his broad grin unmistakably genuine. "Hey," Art called back, walking over. "How was your trip home?" "Did you get to spend some time with your family?" Claire asked, patting him on the back as he joined the group of students gathered by the front gate. "Good, you made it," Professor Glory said warmly, smiling as she began her head count. Art scanned the assembled students, Curtis, Claire, Clive, Lucas, and a handful of others he hadn't gotten to know yet. His eyes darted across the crowd once more, but there was no sign of Tess. Judging by Clive's anxious expression, he'd noticed too. "Sorry I'm late." Tess came sprinting through the gate, her cheeks flushed and hair slightly disheveled as she stopped to catch her breath. "You're the last one, Princess Tessia," Professor Glory said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Now we can head out." After confirming everyone's presence, the professor nodded in satisfaction and turned to lead the group of 15 students toward the teleportation gate. As they walked, Art glanced over his shoulder. Tess was walking beside Clive now, her expression calm again. When their eyes met, she offered him a shy, almost sheepish smile. Art returned it with a small wave before turning back to Curtis and Claire, resuming their easy conversation as the group made their way toward the glowing arch of the teleportation gate. The guard stationed at the teleportation gate adjusted the settings while exchanging a few words with Professor Glory. After several minutes, she gave the group a signal to proceed, allowing each student to step through one by one before entering herself. The familiar disorienting lurch of teleportation twisted in Art's stomach, though the sensation passed quickly as the world solidified again after only a few seconds. "Welcome," Professor Glory announced, planting her hands on her hips as the students took in their surroundings. "I assume for most of you, this is your first time in the Beast Glades?" I've been here countless times, Lucas said, stepping forward with his chest puffed out. I was an A-class adventurer, after all. A few students murmured in awe, which only made Lucas smirk more broadly, until Professor Glory's amused voice cut through the admiration. Ah, yes, she said. Director Goodsky did mention that you were an adventurer. She also noted that your license was revoked. The reaction was immediate. Lucas's grin faltered as he muttered something under his breath, something about a damned masked bastard. But the professor had already moved on, unfazed. Right now, we're near the edge of the Grand Mountains, she continued. If we walk a few hours in that direction, we'll reach the Dragon Spine Inn, a well-known gathering spot for adventurers. Back when I was active, it was the best place to exchange information about mana beasts and dungeons. She paused, sweeping her gaze over the students. We'll be exploring a relatively low-level dungeon today, so there's no need to worry. I'll accompany you at all times, but I won't intervene unless absolutely necessary. Do not rely on me for answers. With a casual wave of her right hand, Professor Glory summoned a small pile of neatly folded black cloth from her dimension ring, the fabric fluttering slightly as it appeared in midair before settling to the ground. Professor Glory held up a stack of neatly folded shawls. These are for you to wear inside the dungeon we'll be exploring, called Widow's Crypt. It's a fairly straightforward dungeon, no traps or mazes, so don't worry about getting lost. It is, however, extremely cold inside, so you'll need these. She glanced at the group, her tone turning serious. The mana beasts in Widow's Crypt are nasty little creatures known as snarlers. There are two types here, the minion snarlers and the queen snarler. The minions are the ones you'll need to watch out for. The queen burrows down to the bottom floor, so you won't encounter it directly, but it's important to know the difference. You'll see what the minions look like once we enter. Professor Glory then reached into the shawl draped over her shoulders and pulled out a small slip of paper. For now, I'm going to split you into 3 teams of 5, she explained. I've already decided the teams, so step forward as I call your names. Curtis, Claire, Dorothy, Owen, and Marge, you will make up the first team. She gestured for them to take their shawls and move to the side. The next 5 students were called, and Art felt a sinking sensation as he realized he hadn't been included yet. Finally, Professor Glory said, pointing to the remaining shawls, that leaves us with Arthur, Lucas, Clive, Tessia, and Roland. Soon, the forest opened up, and they began descending a steep slope. We're almost there. There's a place to rest next to the dungeon, so don't go inside, Professor Glory instructed, stepping to the back and doing a head count as everyone carefully navigated the incline toward the dungeon entrance. Are you sure you want to bring your bond inside the dungeon, Arthur? Professor Glory asked, casting him a concerned glance. Art paused and thought for a moment. What do you say, Sylvie? Do you want to go hunting, since we're at the Beast Glades anyway? Sure, Sylvie replied eagerly. In an instant, she hopped off his head and disappeared into the woods. Professor Glory nodded approvingly. Good choice. It'll probably be safer if she stays out here and lays low. She climbed onto a rock to get a better view of everyone. Now split into your groups and get to know each other. You've seen what everyone in your group can do in class, but take this time to discuss strengths and weaknesses. Communication and trust are vital in team fighting. You'll also need to decide on a leader before entering the dungeon. She settled onto the rock, and their group gathered in a circle on the ground. For a few moments, no one spoke, each student avoiding eye contact. Finally, Roland, the only member of the group Art didn't really know, spoke up. As most of you already know, I'm Roland Alderman. I'm a water attribute augmenter. My hobbies are relaxing, shopping, going on dates with pretty girls, and... No one asked for your hobbies, Clive interrupted, rubbing the bridge of his nose in irritation. Roland smirked, unfazed. Well, someone's a little grumpy. Anywho, my strength is mid-range fighting, using a water whip skill that's been passed down through my family for generations. My weakness is close-range combat. Next. He gestured toward Art with an imaginary baton. Art straightened, meeting the eyes of Lucas across from him. Arthur Leywin. I'm a wind and earth attribute augmenter. I'm adept at all ranges, but prefer mid to close. Clive Graves spoke first, his tone curt. Wind attribute augmenter specializing in long-distance fighting with a bow. I don't really have a weakness. Lucas Wykes. I am a conjurer with a single specialization in fire. As for strengths and weaknesses, just assume you'll be getting in my way during battle. He rolled his eyes and leaned back, legs crossed, radiating casual arrogance. The tension in the air was palpable, and Art noticed Tess shifting uncomfortably. She spoke quietly. Tessia Aerolith. I am a conjurer with a dual specialization in plant and wind. My strong suits are mid to close range fighting. Her voice trailed off, leaving the group in silence, each aware of the unspoken topic looming over them. Lucas broke the quiet first. I elect myself to be the leader. Oh? By what standards do you see yourself as the leader of this group? Art asked, tilting his head with an innocent expression. Strength, of course, Lucas shot back incredulously. Let's be real, I can beat any of you in a fight. Isn't it natural for the strongest one to be the leader? Roland's eyes lit up with fantasy as he interjected. I vote for Tessia. She's the only girl, so we can name our team the Queen and her Knights. I also think Princess Tessia should be the leader. She's the student council president and... Clive's serious expression faltered. His cheeks suddenly flushed as he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I feel that Arthur Leywin would be better suited as leader, Tess countered calmly. I also think Tessia should be the leader. All in favor? Art raised his hand, ignoring her suggestion entirely. He didn't care who led, as long as it wasn't Lucas. Idiots. Lucas rolled his eyes again as the group got to their feet. All right, is everyone ready? Then let's head in. Brace yourselves. Once we get inside, it's going to be chilly, Professor Glory announced, stepping toward the dungeon entrance, a narrow stairway plunging into darkness. The group formed a single-file line, descending the stairs. With every step, the temperature dropped noticeably. What the hell? I didn't think it'd be this cold, Roland stammered, his teeth chattering. Clive's voice cut through the darkness from behind. Augment yourself, you dolt. The dim light revealed nothing more than the vague outlines of the group. As they descended the stairs, something gripped Art's wrist. He instinctively tried to pull away, then realized what it was. A step behind him, the faint outline of Tess's head came into view. She must have been scared, but he said nothing. They continued down the seemingly endless stairway in silence, her warm hand clinging to his arm the entire way. Even without augmenting, the dungeon's cold was manageable thanks to Art's assimilated body. But as the stairway opened into the cavern, a gust of piercingly cold air swept through, forcing him to wrap the shawl tighter around himself. His eyes adjusted to the brighter light, revealing the first floor of Widow's Crypt. Despite having been in dungeons before, the sight still sent a thrill through him. The cavern stretched for hundreds of yards, its architecture seemingly defying logic. The stone walls sparkled with a dim blue light, icicles glinted from the ceiling, and a thin sheet of ice coated the floor. Upon closer inspection, a nearly transparent layer of moss covered the walls and ceiling, bathing the area in a soft, serene glow. That's odd. Usually we'd see a fair amount of snarlers already. Why don't I? Red, beady eyes peeked from behind scattered boulders and small caverns dotting the walls. That's a lot of snarlers. Roland's gulp was audible, his eyes widening in shock. He wasn't the only one stunned. The entire class froze. Even Curtis and Claire looked uneasy. Art glanced at Professor Glory, and her expression mirrored his suspicion. She hadn't anticipated encountering this many snarlers either. Even among mana beasts, snarlers were grotesque creatures. Standing about 4 feet tall, their muscular bodies were covered in thick gray fur, resembling miniature gorillas. Their faces, however, were a disturbing mix of a boar's snout and tusks, beady red eyes, and long, twitching ears. With powerful, protruding jaws, they looked far more intimidating than their E-class rank suggested. The snarlers began emerging from their hiding places by the dozens, snapping their jaws and letting out low, menacing growls. Professor, are there supposed to be this many?" An upperclassman girl from another group stammered, her voice trembling. "This is unusual," Professor Glory said, bracing herself. "Even on the lower floors, there are never this many snarlers bunched together." She maintained a firm stance, aware that any sign of hesitation could send the students into a panic. "There are a lot of them, but they aren't impossible to handle. However, since this is just a class excursion, I think it's best to return to the upper floors for safety." She began slowly guiding the students back toward the stairs. Suddenly, a fireball streaked past her, exploding in the center of the cavern. 6 snarlers were flung apart and lay motionless on the icy floor. "See? These nasty little beasts are weak. Professor, don't tell me you brought us all here just to leave. Even a small fire spell was enough to take out 6 of them," Lucas scoffed, lowering his staff with a smug grin. Professor Glory hesitated slightly, clearly still wary. "I think we should try and train here, Professor," Curtis said, determination etched on his face. Several other students seemed emboldened by Lucas's display of strength. The snarlers observed cautiously, their beady eyes following the group but keeping their distance. "Okay, but if I sense anything amiss, we leave immediately." "Understood." Professor Glory waited until the class nodded in agreement before proceeding further. Once she received a round of nods from the students, Professor Glory instructed, "Good. Split into your teams and take different parts of the floor. We don't want any friendly fire happening in here, and Lucas, if you do something like that again, there will be consequences." She shot the cocky blonde a sharp glare, and he nodded reluctantly. "Prince Curtis, take your team to the left side of the cave. Princess Tessia, take your team to the right and hold your ground. The last team stays with me. I'll be keeping an eye on you at all times, but stay vigilant and don't underestimate the snarlers, especially in these numbers." With that, she motioned for the teams to advance. As they approached the miniature army of snarlers, Tessa's usual shy demeanor vanished, replaced by her authoritative student president persona. "Arthur, you'll be at the vanguard since you excel at close-range combat. Clive and Roland, cover his left and right flanks. Lucas, stay in the center behind Arthur, between Clive and Roland. I'll cover your back. We'll move in the diamond formation we practiced in class." Wet, menacing snarls echoed from all directions, sending chills down everyone's spines. Roland's voice trembled as he took in the 50-odd snarlers snapping their jaws. Clearly intimidated, he gripped the hilt of his weapon, a sword handle, and braced himself for the fight ahead. Clive pulled his metal short bow from his dimension ring and drew it back. Where the arrow should have been, a long metal needle hovered, wrapped in gusts of wind. Art drew Dawn's ballad as well, still wrapped in white cloth. He left it sheathed and lowered himself into a fighting stance, ready in case any of the snarlers leapt. "Spread and destroy!" Ember Wisp. Lucas released one of his favorite spells, and it began floating around them. A loud, throaty shriek pierced Art's ears. He slowed his pace just a dozen feet from the horde. Gripping his sword firmly, he prepared to draw. Then more than 10 snarlers jumped toward them. His instincts screamed to draw his sword immediately, but he held back. He waited until the snarlers all leapt, trying to pile on top of him, before releasing the wind he had condensed inside the scabbard of his sword. Like a loaded spring, Dawn's ballad shot out, breaking the sound barrier with a deafening boom. Art winced instantly at the recoil. Dread shot through him as he realized his shoulder had dislocated. The technique had worked far better than he expected, but he made a mental note. He really shouldn't experiment in actual battles. The snarlers closest to Art were either knocked back or sliced in half, but he couldn't follow up with anything. His right arm dangled uselessly, and Dawn's ballad slipped from his grasp. With a chorus of enraged howls, more snarlers took the place of the fallen, dropping to all fours and charging toward him. Several arrows whizzed past, impaling some of the snarlers that had nearly reached him. Art looked back and gave Clive a nod before picking up his sword with his left hand. On his other side, Roland's empty handle had become a whip made of water, whirling erratically. Some attacks missed by a wide margin, showing that Roland was still mastering his family's technique. Spells fired from their side lit the cave in bursts of red and blue. The snarlers attempted to surround them, but the distance they kept revealed their wariness. Lucas's ember wisps continued shooting streams of fire, though the snarlers were adapting, hurling chunks of ice at the wisps in an attempt to extinguish them. Tess spotted Art clutching his arm while fighting off two snarlers. "Arthur, are you okay?" "I'll be fine." He gritted his teeth, positioning his right arm between his legs, and shoved the shoulder back into place with a shout of pain. The spell, unnamed as of yet, had worked far better than he expected, killing more than 15 snarlers at once. The only drawback was that his body hadn't been able to fully withstand the force. Though individually weak, the seemingly endless numbers of snarlers were taking their toll. Clive and Roland were sweating heavily, and Tess had grown pale. Even Lucas's spells were less flamboyant now, limited by his mana pool. "Is it just me, or are there more snarlers now than there were in the beginning?" Roland shouted, managing to kill 3 snarlers with Clive's assistance. Clive nodded in agreement, glancing at Tess for guidance. "I think you're right. The numbers aren't adding up. Over 100 snarler corpses littered the icy floor, yet countless more still prowled the area, and that was only on their side of the cave. We should head back to Professor Glory. We can't keep fighting like this much longer," Tess said firmly. The group made their way slowly toward the dungeon entrance, noticing that the other teams seemed to have had the same idea. As they approached, Professor Glory moved toward them, slicing through snarlers with her sword as she advanced. "Professor, we can't keep this up. The snarlers keep coming," Tess shouted. "Teams, follow your leaders! We're retreating!" Professor Glory commanded. Without hesitation, she motioned for them to ascend the stairs, but a sudden crash interrupted them. Icicles, stalactites, and debris from the cave ceiling plummeted to the ground as 2 figures descended, flapping their massive wings to maintain balance. "Are you kidding me? What are the Queen's snarlers doing on this floor?" Art's stomach dropped as he watched Professor Glory. She didn't bother hiding her rage, already drawing another massive sword from her dimension ring. He could feel the tension in the air spike. "Class, don't let any of the minion snarlers get in my way. I'll handle the 2 queens. I don't know what's going on, but I'm getting you guys out of here if it's the last thing I do," she barked. Then with a sharp click of her tongue, she pulled something from around her neck and hurled it to the ground. The necklace shimmered violently before turning gray, and the mana surrounding her shifted in a strange, tangible way. She was using a seal. Art's heart thudded. This wasn't just raw power anymore. This was serious magic. "Prepare to back up, Professor Glory. Don't let any of the snarlers get past us," Tess ordered, her bladed staff held rigidly in front of her. "Aye! Vanguards, protect the conjurers," Curtis called, stepping forward with sword and shield ready. Art forced himself to take a step forward, gripping his own sword with both hands to ease the burn in his shoulder. 10 of them formed the front line, while Lucas, Tess, and 3 other girls began chanting spells from the rear. But his eyes couldn't leave Professor Glory. She moved like a storm incarnate, wielding 2 colossal swords, one in each hand. Fire and sand, or something that looked like sand, whirled rapidly around the blades as she chanted, her words too quiet to catch. Slowly, the 2 swirling elements began to intertwine, forming a mesmerizing, terrifying pattern. The 2 queen snarlers, upper-level B-class bosses, easily twice as large and vicious as the minions, and equipped with wings, began cautiously flanking Professor Glory. Their front limbs ended in 4 long, sharp claws that glistened with what Art assumed was poison. Professor Glory, her giant swords ablaze with fire and sand, charged toward the smaller queen snarler, initiating the battle. Art refrained from using any spells, choosing instead to hack and slash his way through the snarlers while augmenting his sword. Their thick coats offered some resistance to attacks, but it didn't take much to bring them down. The corpses, however, were becoming a problem, piling higher and higher around them and obstructing their attacks. Looking around, Art felt a twinge of relief. The vanguards were still holding strong. Both Curtis and Claire had minor scratches and bruises, but they were in much better shape than most of the other students. He glanced back, and what he saw caught him by surprise. Professor Glory was pushing the queens back on her own, but what was most astonishing was how she was doing it. She was obviously a dual elemental augmenter in earth and fire, yet she was producing projectiles that looked like ice shards. Art looked more carefully. No, it wasn't ice, it was glass. A small scratch on Art's arm brought his attention back to the fight in front of him, but he couldn't stop wondering how Professor Glory was able to do that. He knew about superheating sand, but producing that amount of heat while still battling. An ear-splitting cry made everyone turn. Professor Glory had just managed to land the final blow on the smaller queen, but she wasn't in the best shape. Her armor was scratched and dented in several places, and blood trickled down her cheeks. "All right. Nice. Go, Professor." The defeat of one queen dramatically boosted the class's morale, and the students' renewed vigor allowed them to fight back harder against the snarlers, which seemed to appear spontaneously. A loud crash rang out, and a second later Professor Glory flew past the front line, landing hard against a wave of minion snarlers. Art allowed himself a brief glance toward the remaining queen, and a wave of nausea hit him at the sight of the second queen snarler gorging on the corpse of the fallen queen. Art watched the larger queen devouring the smaller one, perplexed by what was happening in this dungeon. There were more than 10 floors here, with minion snarlers inhabiting all but the 10th floor, where the queen snarlers dwelled. This dungeon was considered a beginner dungeon because the queen never left the 10th floor, allowing for easy training up until the very end. Although the queen snarler was a B-class mana beast, a large party of E-class adventurers was still capable of defeating it. That raised another question. Was it normal to have more than one queen in the dungeon? From what Art had read, queen species were highly territorial and aggressive toward any potential competitors or threats to their den. Professor Glory appeared unfazed, but it bothered him. Those queens were supposed to be B-class beasts, so how were they overpowering Professor Glory? An A-class adventurer should have been able to dispose of such creatures easily. "That thing is strong," Professor Glory groaned as she rose to her feet, cleaving through a few minions that blocked her path. Art continued fending off waves of snarlers, but his thoughts kept returning to the sight of the queen snarler feasting on its fallen counterpart. "Professor, does this usually happen?" he asked. "Some species of mana beasts do indulge in cannibalism, but not like this." Shaking her head, she retrieved her other sword and advanced toward her opponent. As the queen snarler finished consuming its fallen comrade, a bizarre transformation took place. Its once gray fur darkened into jet black, and the small horn on its forehead, something Art hadn't even noticed before, curved upward, growing in size. Its beady red eyes sharpened into something far more menacing, almost deranged, and foam began to spill from its mouth. Professor Glory said nothing, but she slowly stepped back as the beast charged at her. Until now, getting home safely had only seemed a matter of time, yet a growing sense of dread coiled in Art's chest from the murderous intent radiating off the queen. "Professor, we can't keep this up," Tess shouted hoarsely over the growls and hisses filling the cavern. She looked exhausted, and it struck Art that they were facing a far more serious problem than any of them had realized. "Everyone! No more fire spells. The entrance of the cave is blocked, so our supply of oxygen is limited." Art roared. The air was growing thick with smoke and fumes from the heaps of scorched snarler corpses, and some of the weaker students were already coughing uncontrollably. The Queen and Professor Glory were locked in a stalemate, though it was clear their professor was being pushed toward the losing side. Focusing on their duel, Art could see that the Queen Snarler's fighting style had completely changed. Gone was any trace of hesitation or self-preservation. Every strike it launched was filled with raw intent to kill, heedless of injury. That recklessness should have been its downfall, yet the creature's black fur seemed to absorb most of the damage from Professor Glory's attacks. She, on the other hand, was forced to work even harder to keep up, unable to rely on any of her fire techniques. "Arthur, I think my mana core is acting up." Tess's strained voice reached him from a few yards behind, and when Art turned, he saw her collapse to her knees, clutching her abdomen. "Damn it. Papa, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Sylvie's voice echoed in his head. She must have sensed his agitation. "We ran into a problem." "Get here as fast as you can and head down the stairs," he replied quickly, before forcing his focus back to the chaos around him. Several thoughts collided in his mind, and a heavy sense of déjà vu crept in. His mind flashed back to the dire tombs. Did he have enough power to clear the mountain of rubble blocking the front entrance to the stairs? And even if he did, should he take Tess and escape on their own? No, Tess would never forgive him if he abandoned everyone else. If he opened a way back up, should he then stay behind to help Professor Glory defeat the mutated Queen Snarler? Whatever he decided, the first thing he needed to do was clear the rubble. It had to be done in one try, because the Queen wasn't going to stand by and let them escape. "Professor, keep the Queen busy. I'll try to make us a way out of here." Professor Glory gave Art a quick nod before turning back to face the raging beast. Tess was in no condition to help, and everyone else was too occupied fending off the endless waves of minion snarlers. Lucas had even resorted to using heat spells in a desperate attempt to hold them back, despite the air growing thinner with every breath. Art gritted his teeth. He would have to do this alone. He ran through his options, trying to think clearly despite the chaos. A large fire spell was out of the question. If he failed, they could all suffocate in the smoke. Water or ice? No. There weren't enough water elemental mana particles in the cave to release anything strong enough to pierce through the mountain of rubble. What had once been an icy cavern was now dry and suffocating, the air thick with the stench and smoke of scorched snarler corpses. That left wind and earth, or some combination of the two, but he wasn't confident he could form a spell powerful enough to break through. He considered using Phase 2, but with Tess's condition, he couldn't risk losing consciousness. Not yet. Was there really no other option? As his mind raced for answers, Art's eyes caught a blur of movement. Professor Glory took a brutal blow to her right arm, and the weight pressing down on him only grew heavier. "I'm almost there, Papa. Hold on." Sylvie's voice echoed in his mind. Sylvie's voice sparked an idea in Art's mind. That's it. "Curtis, I need your help right now," he roared across the battlefield. "Arthur, I don't think I can afford to—" "Come now," Art barked before he could argue. Curtis stumbled over, a bloody, grimy mess. Most of the blood didn't seem to be his, though the shallow cuts covering his body told their own story. His shield was battered and dented, and his sword was slick with gore, its edge dulled from constant use. "What is it?" he panted, barely catching his breath. "Do you think your world howl is strong enough to clear the rubble?" Curtis shook his head hopelessly. "Arthur, I don't think I have enough mana to even go into my first phase." "Just answer the question. Is it strong enough?" "Yeah. If I had enough mana, I could probably make a blast bigger than the one where you, got injured." He frowned, confusion flickering across his face as he tried to figure out what Art was planning. Art briefly considered telling Curtis to direct the blast at the Queen Snarler, but even if it were powerful enough to kill it, there was no way to strike only the Queen without hitting Professor Glory as well. It was safer to stick with his original plan. "Okay, don't question what I'm about to do. Just focus on going into your first phase and producing a blast strong enough to clear that mountain of rubble. Got it?" The urgency in Art's tone must have gotten through to Curtis, because the prince simply nodded and turned toward the collapsed passage. Art removed his seal and slipped it into his dimension ring, carefully controlling the fluctuation of mana so as not to alert anyone. Everyone was too occupied with the snarlers to notice, but if he didn't regulate the surge, like Professor Glory had done when she unsealed herself, the Queen would sense it immediately. Feeling the vast pool of mana now open to him, Art placed both hands on Curtis's back and began channeling power into him. The sudden influx made Curtis drop to one knee before he managed to stabilize himself under the pressure. Mana transference had been studied for generations, or so his professors and the books in the Academy library had said, but it was widely considered impossible. The theory claimed that a mage of one elemental affinity, say fire, could only receive mana from another of the same type. Yet countless experiments had failed. The problem was that no one's mana was composed purely of one element, even among specialists. Hypothetically, if a mage could refine and condense their core to the highest possible level, they might be able to transfer mana to someone with the same elemental composition and level. Otherwise, it was deemed impossible, except for Art. The fact that Art could manipulate all four elements allowed him to mimic the mana composition and elemental ratio of whoever he was transferring to. It was similar to what he'd done for his sister and Lilia when teaching them mana manipulation, just on a much larger, far riskier scale. He hadn't perfected it yet, so inefficiency was inevitable. But this was their best chance. He began transmitting mana into Curtis, carefully balancing and limiting each elemental particle. At the same time, frustration gnawed at him. There had been so many small signs, warnings he'd brushed aside, assuming everything would work out, that he could handle it. Was he taking this life for granted? Having this much power at his age had dulled his sense of caution, the restraint he'd once carried in his former life. No longer a king bound by politics, duty, or his own physical limits, he'd grown careless. In this world, his potential felt limitless. Reaching the white stage, or even beyond, wasn't a dream, just a matter of time and effort. What unsettled him most, though, was the realization that in some ways, he was becoming like Lucas. Not nearly as selfish or cruel, but arrogant nonetheless. Arrogant enough to be reckless. "I don't know what you just did, Arthur, but I feel great. I think I'll be able to go into my first phase," Curtis said, his voice bright with renewed strength. The sudden shift in his mana told Art the transformation had begun. The energy around Curtis grew unstable as he released his beast will. Art's hands jerked back in pain, the backlash searing through his palms as Curtis entered his first phase. Confused, he tried transferring mana again, but the resistance was even stronger this time. Was the mana from his beast will rejecting mine? Before Art could attempt another transfer, Curtis had already begun gathering mana for his World Howl technique. He lowered his stance, bracing himself for the recoil as mana surged toward his open jaw, some drawn from his core, the rest pulled violently from the air around him. Art didn't wait to see the result. He sprinted toward Tess, who was curled up behind the front line, trembling but conscious. Scooping her into his arms, he held her close. Getting her out came first. Everything else could wait. A pang of guilt twisted in his chest. This chaos, part of it was his fault. He should have seen the signs, should have done more to prevent it. A beastly roar tore through the cavern as Curtis unleashed his attack. The air shuddered with pressure. But before the breath could connect, the mutated Queen Snarler suddenly turned, abandoning the wounded Professor Glory and lunging toward Curtis. "Oh no, you don't!" Professor Glory bellowed, hurling herself upward. She caught the creature mid-leap, driving her blade deep into its carapace as the two crashed back to the ground in a violent tangle. Then came the explosion. Curtis's World Howl detonated with deafening force, shattering the collapsed wall and carving a gaping hole through the rubble. Dust and rock rained down, revealing the dark mouth of the stairway leading back to the surface. "Everyone, head to the stairs!" Art roared over the cacophony of growls and falling stone. "Go now!" Professor Glory shouted from below, still grappling with the Queen as her sword flared with mana. The exhausted class made one final push toward the entrance, while Professor Glory held the Queen at bay, the wall of Snarler corpses obstructing the live ones for a brief moment. "Claire, I'm trusting Tess to you." Art handed Tess to Claire, who seemed to be in the best shape. "You're not planning on staying, are you? You can't be serious. As your commanding officer on the disciplinary committee, I forbid. Just go." Art released a sharp killing intent to drive his point home, and Claire flinched backward in surprise. Helping the drained Curtis to his feet, Art shoved both of his disciplinary committee teammates toward the cave entrance, then turned back to where Professor Glory was locked with the Queen. "Why the hell did you come back, Arthur?" she snapped through gritted teeth, frustration evident in her voice. "It's going to take both of us to kill this thing." Art drew Dawn's ballad from his dimension ring and unsheathed it. "Listen to your superiors when they give you an order," Professor Glory shot back, blocking a slash from the Queen's claws. "Hey, I'm a professor too, remember?" Art countered, lunging beneath the sweeping attack to strike at the beast's exposed flank. "We'll finish this discussion after we've made it through this," she retorted, her tone strained with focus. The situation was grim. The mana transference had drained most of Art's reserves, and if it weren't for mana rotation, he would have already collapsed from the backlash. He risked a glance toward the exit. Almost everyone had made it out. Only Lucas remained. Their eyes met for a brief, tense moment before Lucas turned away and disappeared up the stairs. Art could have sworn he saw him snort before vanishing. Refocusing, Art and Professor Glory pressed the assault. Working in tandem, they managed to slice through one of the Queen's wings. The creature shrieked as it crashed to the ground, no longer capable of flight. Even so, its thick fur dulled their blows, leaving only shallow cuts. The mutated Queen loomed over them, over 10 feet tall, its body a mass of wounds, but its rage burned undiminished. "I don't think we can kill this thing," Art shouted to Professor Glory, who was positioned on the other side of the Queen's snarler. "We'll need to at least bind it somehow so we can escape." "I don't think it'll follow us out of the dungeon," she responded, even as the Queen howled in fury. "I need you to keep it busy for 5 seconds," Art said, repositioning so that Professor Glory stayed in view. "Okay." She didn't question him, simply unleashing another burst of mana from her core. As Professor Glory lunged toward the mutated Queen, Art slid Dawn's ballad's sheath back into his dimension ring and gripped the sword with both hands. He channeled the last of his mana into the blade, willing lightning to flow through it. Without the extra energy to enhance his movements, his dash toward the Queen felt sluggish, almost like crawling. "Move!" he barked. At his signal, Professor Glory leaped aside just as he drove his sword into a wound he had made earlier, just above the creature's hip. Electricity arced through the shallow cut with a sharp crackle, and the Queen emitted a high-pitched shriek as its body convulsed violently. "Let's go!" Art barely had time to react before Professor Glory grabbed him by the waist and began carrying him toward the front entrance. He struggled to pull Dawn's ballad free, but it slipped from his grasp as she yanked him to safety. Hordes of minions swarmed in their path, but Professor Glory slashed through them with deadly precision until they reached the entrance. Then movement caught their eyes, a shadow against the wall. Professor Glory gasped as they both turned. The Queen, Dawn's ballad still embedded in its hip, had somehow recovered enough to make one desperate leap to stop them from escaping. "Move!" Art shouted, clinging to her back. The professor lunged forward, and they barely dodged the Queen's sharp claws before crashing hard onto the ground. They didn't have the luxury of looking back. Art scrambled past the minions and into the hall. Finally, he risked a glance over his shoulder and spotted the mutated Queen crawling after them. The last attack had clearly done some damage. It wasn't moving freely, instead dragging itself forward with its claws. But there was something else. Something deeply unsettling about it. The Queen's snarler managed to scrabble through the rubble and began heaving itself up the stairs behind them. A knot of dread twisted in Art's gut, urging him to put as much distance as possible between them and the creature. As it drew closer to the top of the staircase, its body and face began to pulsate unnaturally. Tumors sprouted sporadically across its flesh and exoskeleton. "Don't tell me..." Before he could finish his thought, the Queen erupted in a violent explosion of guts, blood, and shattered exoskeleton. The force tore a massive hole in the ground where it had stood. Professor Glory was pushed forward before she could turn, and her grip on Art slipped. "Arthur!" she cried desperately, reaching for him. But it was too late. Every heartbeat made him feel weaker. "Save Tess!" he shouted, channeling the last of his mana to augment his body. Tumbling through the hole, Art flailed his arms and legs, frantically seeking anything to halt his plummet and prevent him from meeting a gruesome fate on the ground below. Falling debris obstructed his attempts to regain control, but at last, his right hand seized a tree root protruding into the opening. Regrettably, it was the same arm that had suffered a dislocation during the earlier battle. The abrupt stop sent a searing pain coursing through his arm, causing him to yearn for a different outcome, one where he had fallen flat on the ground instead. Dangling helplessly by his right arm, which seemed on the brink of tearing free at any moment, Art found himself in total darkness and choking dust within the gap where he had fallen. He collected his thoughts, and in a bid to alleviate some of the agony, employed his left arm to grip the root above. All the while, he urgently transmitted a mental message to Sylvie. "Sylv, are you there? I fell quite a ways, but I'm still all right. Can you sense my location?" Art waited for a minute, growing increasingly anxious as he received no response from Sylvie, unable even to sense his bond. Concern swirled through his mind. Had something happened to her? However, given that the Queen Snarler had perished and the rest of his party remained trapped within the dungeon, this seemed unlikely. It appeared more plausible that he was too far down, or that the area he now found himself in had been warded and sealed off from the outside world, or more precisely, the surface. Considering the substantial distance of his descent, Art doubted he had landed on one of the floors immediately below, leading him to ponder whether the explosion had unveiled a concealed passage to some chamber hidden within the dungeon. Contemplating the strange nature of the explosion caused by the mutated Queen Snarler, he found it perplexing. Although the blast had been substantial, he sensed that it hadn't been intended to lethally harm anyone nearby. Had that been the case, both he and Professor Glory would be in considerably worse condition. Gritting his teeth, Art resisted the urge to simply let go and resign himself to the whims of fate in this unfamiliar world. After a swift evaluation of his physical condition, which, aside from his dislocated right shoulder, seemed relatively intact, he attempted to take in his surroundings. However, the inky blackness that enveloped him was not simply dark. It was an impenetrable void. It felt akin to squeezing one's eyes shut tightly, as if strange lights were swirling in the darkness, or the sensation of attempting to squint harder and harder without any adjustment in vision. Acting on his instinct, Art initiated his mana rotation, concentrating the mana that enveloped his body solely into his left arm. He needed to utilize this break time to amass as much mana as possible. With hope of gaining sight in this oppressive darkness, he channeled his limited mana into enhancing his eyes. But all he encountered was an unremitting void. A sudden surge of anxiety compelled him to break one of the fundamental rules of a situation like this, igniting a small flame at the tip of his right index finger, just to affirm that he wasn't blind. Observing the warm, flickering red and orange glow of the fire on his fingertip, Art breathed a sigh of relief before extinguishing the flame. In the oppressive darkness, He knew that while vision was crucial, attracting attention in this lightless abyss was the last thing he wanted. With his location potentially revealed to any lurking threats, he understood the urgency of moving swiftly. However, the complete absence of light made navigation a daunting challenge. In the absence of sight, Art relied on wind manipulation to gauge the nature of his surroundings. Though he couldn't ascertain the precise dimensions of the space he found himself in, he surmised that it wasn't excessively wide, given the numerous obstacles he had encountered during his fall. Employing short, gentle gusts of wind around him, Art approximated that the shaft, as he described it, had a diameter of roughly 30 feet. Nonetheless, he remained uncertain about the depth of his descent and how much further he needed to traverse before encountering solid ground. Faced with a critical decision, Art deliberated over whether to attempt to climb upward or continue descending into the unknown. Given the substantial amount of debris that had fallen alongside him, he deduced that there was likely an opening at the top. However, the absence of any response from Sylvie and the incapacitated state of Professor Glory and his fellow students made it clear that immediate rescue was an unlikely option. Consequently, he reluctantly embraced his only viable choice, continuing his descent. With a heavy sigh, he committed to this course of action. Despite his best efforts to remain composed, Art couldn't shake the anxiety that swirled around him in this disorienting situation. The absence of sight, or the ability to sense any life forms, left him feeling more unsettled than when he faced tangible dangers. In the midst of the Snarler attack, he had been in control, knowing what actions to take. Now, the unpredictable and unfamiliar nature of his surroundings weighed heavily on him. To navigate this dark abyss, Art infused both his hands with Earth Attribute mana, creating a sturdy handhold in the wall. He pressed himself against the surface, securing his grip with both hands to prevent a fall. Methodically, he repeated the process, descending in short increments, wincing as the strain on his arms grew with each descent. He understood that this was the swiftest way down, despite the discomfort it brought. Art clung to the wall with a rhythm of grip and release, keenly aware of the need to maintain his flat position to prevent falling away from the surface. He had to find a balance between maintaining his grip and controlling his descent, not allowing himself to gain too much speed. Periodically, he released bursts of wind, hoping to gauge the distance to the floor below. After 3 hours of this taxing descent, as per his internal clock, Art had yet to sense any solid ground nearby. Frustration boiled within him, his inner thoughts expressing sentiments far too uncouth for spoken words. He couldn't help but reflect on the warnings given to adventurers about the dangers and unpredictability of dungeons. This supposedly beginner-level dungeon had proved to be more treacherous than all his previous adventures, even those undertaken without the aid of magic. His mind couldn't help but drift to memories of the dire tombs, another harrowing experience that still haunted him. Art couldn't help but mull over the absurdity of the situation. Of all the times he had ventured into a D-class dungeon, an area supposedly inhabited by E-class monsters, this particular day had to be the one when a monstrous army decided to welcome him and his companions on the very first floor. Reflecting on the encounter, he admitted that the initial encounter with the minion snarlers had not been overly challenging. In fact, their overuse of fire magic had been their own downfall due to the lack of ventilation in the area. Art had managed to dispatch most of them without relying on his mana. However, the real problem had emerged in the form of the mutated Queen Snarler. He couldn't help but wonder how it had grown so powerful. Could it be attributed to its consumption of the other Queen Snarler? Was it even conceivable for such a rapid power surge to occur? While mentally processing the day's events, Art continued his descent, gripping and releasing the stone wall as he fell further into the unknown. But this time, something strange occurred. As he attempted to bury his augmented hands into the wall once more, he found that they couldn't penetrate the surface. Confusion and concern gripped him as he desperately clawed at the unyielding wall, even with the aid of his augmentation. The surface of the wall had transformed, becoming unnaturally smooth, a stark departure from its previous rugged texture. Art's fall was accelerating as he persisted in his futile attempts to find a grip. "This isn't working," he muttered to himself, frustration building with each passing moment. In a calculated effort to minimize noise, Art resorted to releasing periodic pulses of wind around him as he descended, a makeshift form of echolocation. His hope was to locate potential footholds or handholds to arrest his fall, but his makeshift technique wasn't proving as effective as he had envisioned. In practice, it proved to be more challenging than he had anticipated. The available handholds were scarce, and his attempts at echolocation often led to narrowly missing potential supports. The situation worsened as he continued to gather speed during his descent. Art couldn't sense the floor anywhere near, which meant he had some time to act. However, the increasing velocity of his fall posed a dilemma. Even if he managed to grab a support, he questioned whether his arms could endure the abrupt stop. Continuing to grope the wall desperately, Art searched for any potential handhold or surface irregularity that might slow down or halt his rapid descent. Suddenly, his senses registered the proximity of the ground below. "Damn it, this isn't good," he muttered in dismay. With approximately 200 yards remaining before his inevitable impact with the ground, he estimated he had about 6 seconds left. "Damn it all," he cursed under his breath. There was no time to lose. Shifting his position so that his back was against the wall, Art gathered every ounce of mana he had conserved. He needed at least 4 seconds to concentrate enough mana for his wind torrent spell. With his arms stretched out in front of him, he unleashed a powerful stream of compressed air towards the opposite side of the enormous chasm that had swallowed him. The objective was clear: generate sufficient force to counteract his plummet and slow down enough to survive the fall. In this critical moment, Art disregarded any concerns about minimizing noise. The torrent of air erupted with a resounding boom as it collided forcefully with the wall on the opposite side of the abyss. Art's body was pushed even harder against the smooth wall behind him due to the spell's powerful recoil. The friction generated from this desperate maneuver began to sear through the back of his uniform and his skin, prompting him to clench his teeth in pain. As he felt himself teetering on the brink of experiencing the backlash from overextending his mana, Art strained to release every last bit of mana he could muster while keeping his mana rotation in check. The relentless air current continued to smash against the opposing wall, exerting increasing pressure on him as he descended rapidly toward the unseen ground below. 100 feet, 70 feet, 50 feet. A faint light became visible on the horizon. 30 feet, 10 feet. With a high-pitched scream escaping his lips, Art felt his descent slow down, although the searing pain coursing through his back had grown so excruciating that his body began to numb. Just 2 yards from the ground, Art expelled one final mighty pulse of compressed air directly beneath him. His eyes bulged, and all he could manage was a painful cough as he finally met the ground. Art rolled forward as best as he could manage, attempting to disperse the pressure from his landing, but it proved insufficient. The impact felt as if a hammer had been pounded against an unyielding anvil, leaving him reeling. His head spun and his vision became a blur. Staying conscious was a struggle, like grasping at fleeting shadows. But then, a glimmer of hope. His vision. Art lifted his head from the ground, squinting against the faint lights that now illuminated his surroundings. Despite the blurriness, he discerned that he was situated within a passageway, marked by small lights along its sides. Further down the corridor, a brighter source of illumination beckoned. A voice, trembling with fear, echoed down the hallway. "Who's there?" it inquired. Art attempted to respond to the anxious voice, but his vocal cords failed him. His mouth opened, but only a raspy cough emerged. "Please, I need help," the voice implored, its desperation palpable. Once more, Art's attempts at vocalization proved futile, and his vision continued to dim. Struggling to rise, his legs buckled beneath him. "Hold on," Art managed, his voice faint and hoarse, but audible enough for the woman to hear. She responded with labored breaths, eventually murmuring, "Okay." Guided by Sylvia's dragon will, Art's body began a gradual process of self-healing. His back bore the scorches of sliding down the wall, and his legs felt as if they had been torn apart and crudely reassembled. Nevertheless, within 30 minutes, he managed to stand on his own. Surveying his surroundings, Art found no trace of the expansive tunnel that had opened above him. Instead, he stood amidst shattered stones and, he surmised, a fragment of the Queen Snarler's limb that had exploded. Nearby, a glint of light caught his eye, radiating from beneath a pile of rubble. Despite the pain that accompanied each faltering step, Art approached the source of the reflection with determination. A smile crept across his face as he recognized what lay beneath the debris. His sword. Gritting his teeth, he began to dig and pull, extracting Dawn's ballad from its rocky prison. With his prized weapon securely back within his dimension ring, Art also stashed away the severed limb of the mutated Queen Snarler, harboring hopes of studying it should he ever find his way out of this perilous place. Trying to maintain an optimistic outlook, Art acknowledged that, all things considered, he was in relatively good condition. His efforts had succeeded in slowing his fall to the point where he hadn't suffered any broken bones. The impact, however, had sent shockwaves through his spine and rattled his brain, nearly causing him to lose consciousness. Yet, given the dire circumstances, he couldn't help but feel that things could have been much worse. His mana was gradually recovering, and now that his legs were functional again, he started making his way towards the voice that had gone disturbingly quiet. "Hello?" Art called out as he leaned against the tunnel wall for support, moving cautiously down the passage. "I'm here," came the faint reply, weaker than it had been half an hour earlier. As he approached the end of the tunnel, Art paused to let his vision adjust to the sudden brightness, having been shrouded in pitch darkness for so long. Slowly he advanced toward the growing source of light, once more calling out to the person. "This way?" the voice responded with a weak cough. Art couldn't reply. Horror seized him as he stumbled back, nearly losing his balance at the shocking sight before him. The abattoir full of snarler bodies piled on top of each other in the dungeon above seemed like something from a children's picture book compared to the scene in front of him, but Art couldn't seem to peel his eyes away from it. Corpses. Corpses of humans, elves, and dwarves lay scattered, some in pieces, around a cavern that would have been considered beautiful otherwise. The grass-like moss spread over the ground seemed to have once been green, but was now dyed red with blood, and the stream crossing through the cavern was clogged with floating bodies, blood swirling around them. There must have been 40 or 50 corpses spread throughout the cavern, their weapons next to them. The bodies revealed signs of torture. Some had had their limbs torn apart, and other beheaded bodies showed cuts and gashes all over them. Art heard her cough again. "Are you still there?" The weak voice came from his left. "I can't see, oh..." Art's heart dropped and he couldn't even finish. The woman lying against the wall of the cavern was probably in a worse state than the mutilated carcasses spread around her. The woman, an elf it seemed, was missing most of her limbs. Where her right arm and both legs should have been were gaping wounds that had been cruelly sealed by burning. Her eyes were gone, and dried blood that had streamed down from the sockets stained her cheeks. Through the woman's abdomen, right where her manicore was, a sleek black spike impaled her. "You... how?" Art dropped to his knees in front of her as he inspected her. Art felt like he'd seen her somewhere. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he recognized her face. "Where did I... the lances... the 6 lances..." She was one of the 6 strongest mages in all of Decathlon, chosen to represent the continent. "You're one of the 6 lances," Art sputtered. "Indeed I am." She sighed weakly, her voice ragged. "As for how, if you're asking how I'm still alive in this state, it's because he left me alive." She furrowed her eyebrows, and the dried blood between her eyelids crumbled away, revealing a fresh trickle of blood from her empty eye sockets. "He?" Art felt like he was asking obvious questions, but he couldn't comprehend the situation. "Yes, Vritra." With her remaining left hand, she slowly reached behind her and pulled out something. In her hand, she held a sleek black fragment of some stone. As Art squinted to examine it, a memory surged in his mind, connecting the pieces. He gingerly took the black shard from her outstretched hand, realizing why it seemed so familiar. The memory clicked into place, and anger coursed through him. He understood why this black stone resembled something he'd seen before. It was a part of the horn of one of the black-horned demons that Sylvia had initially disguised herself as, the very creatures that had taken her life. "Can I keep this?" Art asked. He noticed that his palm was bleeding from gripping the shard of the horn too tightly. The elven woman, despite her condition, let out a hoarse chuckle at his question, catching him by surprise. He raised an eyebrow, wondering what was going through her mind, and thinking how admirable it was that she could still laugh, considering her situation. "Please, try not to move too much," he admonished gently, using what little mana he had left to give her more strength. I don't know what you're doing, but I feel slightly better than a corpse now, she said. It's just a temporary solution, Art mentioned. Does it seem strange that I am so at ease in this situation? She asked. No, not strange. Admirable, if anything, Art replied. You're a strange one too, asking a dying soldier if you can keep something like that. Keep it, it's of no value to me anyway. Her breath shuddered, and her face became suddenly grave, making her appear as if she had aged 20 years. I don't know your name, kid, but I'm going to die soon. There's no point in pretending otherwise. The elven warrior let out a ragged breath, but her expression remained resolute. My name is Arthur, and... yeah. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any way for me to save you, Art said as he put the black shard inside his dimension ring. I'm sorry. It just wasn't meant to be. Since I don't have a lot of time, I'll tell you as much as I know, she said with solemn resolve. My name is Aaliyah Triskin. As you deduced, I am one of the 6 lances, and the corpses you probably spotted upon your arrival were my troops. Each lance was in charge of a battalion composed of top mages. She stopped to catch her breath, and Art was glad she wasn't able to witness the gruesome slaughter that had turned this once beautiful place into a grave of mangled corpses. After the formation of the 6 lances, I had been training them to work as a team to clear dungeons and other unknown areas. The 6 lances rarely go on missions together unless we are to explore an S-class or above dungeon, she explained, her voice weak. She fell silent, and Art worried that she had spent the last of her strength, but then she took a deep, wheezing breath and continued. From the direction of your footsteps earlier, it seems you came in from a different entrance. This place is actually connected to 3 dungeons. Which dungeon did you come from, Arthur? Aaliyah wiggled her body, struggling to keep herself propped up against the wall. I came from the Widow's Crypt. We were on a class expedition. Everyone else was able to make it out, but I guess I wasn't so lucky, Art replied as he took a seat against the wall next to Aaliyah. He surveyed the carnage displayed before him, his mind piecing together the horrifying events from the positions and injuries of the bodies. I'm not sure how old you are, Arthur, but no one should have to see something like this, Aaliyah whispered, her voice laced with remorse. My age. Well, that's complicated, but you're right. No one, regardless of age, should have to see something like this, Art agreed. Her breathing became more ragged and uneven, but she held on. My troops and I came from an A-class dungeon called Hell's Jaw. We were assigned to investigate the dungeon after getting reports of inconsistent sightings inside. The adventurers who had come back were ones who frequented the dungeon for training. They barely made it back alive, and they all spoke about how the beasts residing within suddenly became stronger and fiercer. Was that the case for the dungeon you came from as well? Aaliyah asked, her words coming more slowly. Yes, just on the first floor, an army of minion snarlers welcomed us. The minions weren't bad, but 2 queen snarlers showed up. One of the queens, after eating the other queen, turned from gray to black and its strength jumped a fewfold. It started to grow a horn, which, well, it reminded me of something I'd seen before. Something like a horned demon? Aaliyah's limp body suddenly stiffened as her head turned back toward Art, shock evident in her voice. Yes, that's what I was thinking of, and this piece of horn only confirms it. I wonder if it was the same one. Art responded frankly. The same one? You think there's more than one? Aaliyah's voice was hoarse with terror. I don't have definite proof, but I suspect that the one you saw, this Vritra, is just one of the horned demons out there somewhere, Art replied, recalling the night he had gotten separated from Sylvia. The black demon with downward curving horns had said something about causing them trouble. It was just speculation, but he suspected there were probably more of them. Art's mind began to spin as he pondered the different possibilities and reasons as to why they might be doing this. Was this all for Sylvie, or some greater cause? Art remembered that, when Sylvia had given the stone to him, she'd said he had to protect it at all costs. That stone turned out to be an egg, and of a dragon no less. Was Sylvie such an important creature that the horned demons would go this far for her? What are you thinking of, Arthur? Aaliyah let out a strained cough, and fresh blood escaped from the wound where her mana core had once been. Art had always found it intriguing that, while beast cores could be harvested and used as tools to enhance mana, human mana cores couldn't. When a mage died, their mana core shattered, and the mana accumulated inside dispersed. Was this because they gathered mana from the atmosphere? There seemed to be a deeper meaning when Art thought about the fact that humans didn't need their mana cores in order to survive, but their mana cores were dependent on them being alive. This world seemed to revolve around whether or not you were a mage, and if you were, how strong you were. Art couldn't help but think that the god of this world had wanted to tell them that life was more important than magic. It should be an obvious statement, but it seemed to be something the people of this world had forgotten. Before Art could lose himself to thoughts of a higher being, Aaliyah's ragged coughing snapped him back to reality. "Are you okay?" That was a dumb question. Of course she isn't okay. When my team reached the first floor of Hell's Jaw, there was nothing off about it. The mana beasts were exactly what we expected. Everything was normal until we reached the final floor, where the master of the dungeon made its den. The Hades Serpent was an AA-class mana beast. Should have been something I could beat fairly easily. There was no trace of boasting or overconfidence in her tone. She was just stating a fact. The Hades Serpent is known for blue fire spouting along its spine, but it looked different. At first, we were confused. It didn't look like it had any flames at all. But when we looked closer, we realized the reason we couldn't see the flames against the black walls of the cave was because the flames themselves were black. It looked like thick smoke flickering wildly along the spine of this 100-foot serpent. That particular Hades Serpent also had a black horn jutting out of its forehead, while its scales, which were recorded as being a matte gray color, were a sleek black, she said, starting to shiver. The fight was gruesome. I lost 5 of my men to that Hades Serpent. The fight lasted several hours, but I was finally able to kill it. When we tried to retrieve the beast core, though, it wasn't there. She broke into another fit of coughs, so Art ran toward the pond. Art followed the edge until he found water that hadn't been tainted by blood and soaked what was left of his uniform in it. He allowed the fabric to absorb as much water as it could, then walked back to Aaliyah. "Open your mouth," he instructed. "This is just water." She opened her mouth immediately. Art gently squeezed his soaked uniform over her mouth, and the water trickled across her lips. She let out a short moan as the cold water wet her parched mouth, drinking fiercely as he wrung out the ragged cloth. Once he'd squeezed out the last drop, Art used the damp rags to wipe away some of the blood on her face. She whispered a small thank you, then continued her story. Although we were tempted to go back to the surface, we had too many questions, so we started searching for clues inside. One of my men used a spell and found there was a hidden tunnel underneath a thin layer of earth. After falling down tunnel, we arrived here. Aaliyah's voice trembled at those words, and fresh blood began streaming from the wounds where her eyes used to be. He was here when we reached this cavern. I still remember the way he looked at us. Those scarlet eyes. She let out a trembling breath, then continued. My team and I, no one knew what the monster was, so we did what our instincts told us to do. We raised our weapons. That was our first mistake. I can still picture it so clearly. His pale gray skin, his face. It was beastly, yet it looked almost human. He looked at us and smirked, exposing his sharp fangs. What threw us off was when he talked. Her voice fell into a whisper. Art responded, just to let her know he was still there. He wasn't even surprised to see us there. Vritra, that thing, just looked at us before. Before? Art asked, sitting upright. He gave us 2 options. Weakly, she raised her left hand and wiped at the blood running down her face as if cleaning away unwelcome tears. He looked straight at me, as if he knew instantly that I was the leader, and told me he'd let me walk out unharmed if I... She choked back a sob, her remaining hand clenched into a red fist. If I dismembered each of my teammates one by one in front of him. Such an offer would have infuriated anyone, but looking at the state Aaliyah was in right now, Art couldn't say with confidence she had made the right decision. Maybe her teammates would have wanted her to kill them quickly instead of being tortured the way they were. What was the other option? Art asked, gently wrapping his hands over her clenched fist. He just scoffed at us and said, "Or you can try and fight." Unable to find words to comfort her, Art just kept his hands wrapped tightly around her fist. Moments trickled by, only the sound of the running water and Aaliyah's quiet sobs breaking the deathly silence. We didn't stand a chance, she whispered, hiccuping. I hate to make you relive the scene, but I need as many of the details as possible, Aaliyah. Art gently stroked her hand to try and calm her. He had one horn in the middle of his forehead. It curved backward sharply, she said, forcing herself to speak calmly. One horn? So there really was more than one of the horned demons. Was it a clan? A race Art's heart began racing uncontrollably, just imagining a whole race composed of horned demons, and a single one of them could wipe out one of the 6 lances and her entire team. Yes, my strongest single-point attack only managed to create a small chip in that horn. Alea seemed like she wanted to ask Art something, but her breath was getting shorter, so she continued. Vritra was able to use magic that seemed to defy common sense. It wasn't like any magic I've ever seen. Alea's forced calm cracked, and her lips began to quiver. What kind of magic did he use? Metal, black metal. He was able to instantaneously conjure metal spikes, blades, any sort of weapons from the ground, from himself. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It was over too quickly. Half of my team was dead in the first wave of attacks he unleashed, with a simple flick of his wrist. When the ones that were still alive attacked him, he didn't even bother to dodge. Plates of black metal materialized instantly and blocked whatever attacks managed to get near him. Art felt his face tense as he tried to visualize what powers Vritra, and possibly his entire race, might possess. It seemed to be conjuring, but on a completely different level. The way she described it made it seem more akin to manifestation, or even creation of a certain phenomenon, rather than influencing mana particles that already existed. How is that even possible, though? Were they capable of just skipping steps in the fundamental laws of magic in this world? Or were they simply more knowledgeable, able to do this through a special skill? At the sound of coughing, Art's head immediately turned toward Alea. It was worse than before. She was coughing up blood. Vritra. He left after doing this, to me. I'm not sure if he knew someone was going to come, but the last thing he did was to tell me his name, and to say that Decathlon was going to become a war zone. Blood dribbled from the corner of her mouth as she turned her head toward Art. This may sound preposterous, but can you do me a favor? Aaliyah gave a faint smile, revealing blood-stained teeth. Sure, anything. Art expected her to leave him with an item or message, perhaps for her family or a loved one back home. Hold me, she mumbled. Art leaned in closer. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. I always thought I didn't need anyone, as long as I was strong enough. I never had a family or lover to depend on. But you know, I really don't want to die alone right now. Alea bit her trembling lower lip. Can you hold me? Without saying a word, Art gently wrapped his arms around Alea's fragile neck and waist, leaning her head against his chest. I'm scared, she muttered. I don't want to die. Art stayed silent, gritting his teeth. As before, he was unable to find the words to comfort her. He softly stroked Alea's hair and felt her breathing become weaker and weaker. Moments later, she passed away in his arms.